everyone, and welcome to another episode of Inclusive Workplaces with Amara. I am your host, Amara Igboegwu. Hello. This is a weekly live stream podcast that's focused on sharing best practices for building inclusive workplaces. And I'm super excited to be here today. And guess what? I have an incredible show for you all. So if you're tuning in from YouTube, a big hello. And if you're watching the replay, you're most welcome to the show. Please feel free to share your comments and your questions. And if you're joining live on LinkedIn, hey, let's build this conversation together. We are going to be having a great experience because I have the most incredible guest today. We have a creative, we have an inventor, a leader, a visionary, and I'm so excited to be sharing with you Ilana Ben-Ari as she comes on, and we're going to be joining in to share with us, our thoughts around empathy. Of course, given our title today. So, Ilana, you are most welcome. Hello.
Hey.
How are you? It's been a while.
It has been so long. Last time I saw you was in person in February 2020.
I know, exactly 2 years.
A whole other lifetime ago. So it's my pleasure, and I'm so excited to be here.
Ilana, you're amazing. Thank you. And for those who don't know you, I want to just give a quick, overview of the incredible work you've been doing, Ilana. As you already know, Ilana Ben-Ari is the founder, CEO of 21 Toys. She is a toy designer turned social entrepreneur and inventor of the failure toy and the empathy toy. These are award-winning facilitation tools used in over thousands of boardrooms and classrooms in over 50 countries. And she's been featured in Inc. magazine, as well as she's also been recognized in Time magazine as having developed technology that is reshaping the future of learning. The ethos of her company is really about bringing empathy, resilience, collaboration to the world. I think that that's just absolutely fantastic what you do, Ilana. And I must say, your tagline, where we are a learning and developing toy company using toys to teach what textbooks can't, I think is absolutely brilliant and exactly right. So welcome, Ilana. Welcome indeed.
Thank you. That's excellent. A very warm introduction. I really appreciate it.
You're absolutely welcome. Ilana, I know the work you've been doing and what you've done in terms of, really raising awareness. And one thing I absolutely love is the fact that you've been able to, lift empathy from this theoretical, psychological, concept to something tangible where we can really practice. And of course, I'm wanting to know your perspective and I guess your definition of empathy, and then how you got into the empathy toy. Go right ahead.
So I think when we talk about using toys to teach empathy, my joke is like, we're not the first ones to do that. Mm-hmm. I think we're trying to do a lot of things at the same time. So the idea that we valued play from the moment that we're born to like the summer before grade 1, mm-hmm. and play is how we learn and how we understand the world. And then suddenly we remove play from our education. Play is what teaches us things like empathy and resilience. And I think my definition of, what is empathy, we've seen a lot of different definitions. There's walking a mile in someone else's shoes. Mm-hmm. But if you look at my favorite definition of empathy comes from an empathy expert. His name is Roman Kachernik. He's part of a co-founder of the School of Life out of the UK. And he likes to say that it's the imaginative act of stepping into somebody else's experience. And so the idea that when we talk about play and creativity and empathy, like you need creativity to be empathic, to be imaginative and imagine what it's like in someone else's shoes or their experience. But on the reverse, you can't have creativity without empathy. So for anyone that studies design thinking, and my background is industrial design, and that's where I initially invented the empathy toy, the beginning of design is empathic observation. So you can't design anything or create anything new, either as a designer or a business person or entrepreneur, if you can't look at things from multiple perspectives, if you can't take on perspectives that aren't your own. So the role of empathy and creativity I see go hand in hand.
Yeah, I absolutely love how you said that, the idea of being people centered, because that's what it is about, right? It's like understanding the perspectives and designing from that lens. And I also love the quote, the definition that you shared about, I'm just going to put it back up, like empathy is the imaginative act of stepping into someone's experience or someone else's experience. I think that is so powerful. Wow, that we are seeing so many conversations already going up. Let's see what's going on there. Oh, hello. Okay, some people are saying hello to us. Okay. Hi, Emma. Hey, hi, Eve. Hey. She said Fab from Germany. Hello, Eve. Great to see you. And oh, we've got also Juliet. Hello, Juliet. And we've got Chukwemeka. Hello. And Ifeanyi. Hi, everyone. Oh, thank you so much for joining in. This is our show, right? So we're going to be, please feel free to ask questions and also share. What do you think when you hear the word empathy? What comes to mind? Let's share in the comment section. That would be great to share, and I'm sure Ilana would also love to hear that as well. Yeah, you're absolutely right. When we talk about empathy, we're really talking about that perspective taking, right?
Mhm.
But and the great thing I love about the toys that you've created is that it from the get go, you're forced to then begin to engage and try to understand what the other person is saying, because you're blindfolded and you can't really see, and and that's a great way to learn how to pause and be patient. But there are some challenges too, right? What are some challenges that you've seen along the way with running these workshops?
So maybe what might help is I can step back and kind of explain. It's always hard, but I have some words to explain just how the toys work. So for those who haven't seen it, it's an abstract wooden toy that you play blindfolded if it's in person, and we have a way of adapting that when it's online. But if Amar and I were playing, we would each have identical pieces that have different like materials, textures, and shapes, and they connect in thousands of different patterns. So Amar, you might be given like one pattern, and you have to describe that pattern so that I can recreate it, or a room of 10 people recreate it. We can run workshops from anywhere from 2 to 200. But in 5 to 15 minutes in playing, you gain huge insights into how you deal with patience, frustration, and most importantly, creative communication. So when I say, when folks hear that I've designed an empathy toy, first of all, they think it's a teddy bear in a Kleenex box. So a lot of the topics we cover are like so heavy. We think about what tools we've used in like our history as like humans. It's play. Like if you look at any animals or humans or how we understand the world, how we become creative, how we build emotional intelligence, it's through play. And so this idea that it's so heavy and then we just use the really theoretical part of our brain to like deconstruct it, we're denying ourselves the ability to explore and be curious. And when we talk about the empathy toys so often, and the failure toy as well, folks think that the goal of those toys are to teach you to be very empathic, and the goal of the failure toy is to teach you to be comfortable with failure. That might be an outcome of playing, but the goal of all of the toys, and especially the empathy toy, is to meet you where you're at and give you insights into how you react to patience and frustration, how you empathize. Because some folks might not be able to empathize with their bosses or their colleagues, or they get really short, or they have no patience when they're under stress. Other folks might be so overwhelmed with all of the emotions around them that they actually shut down. And so that the takeaway is not to do one extreme. It's that we don't have a place to have an education around just how do we show up when things come up, and then how do we show up when other people's emotions are also interacting. So that's where it gets fun and curious. But yeah, anecdotally, my joke is I love seeing the toy in action when it's like with an incredible facilitator or in a classroom, because it's ages 6 to CEO that for the participants.
Yeah.
But I don't recommend. I don't like to be held accountable if you play it with, let's say, your family. So different definitely play in when you have a lot of comfort with the folks that you're playing with. And so really every single game is different because it's a reflection of that group dynamic. So it's from how you're feeling that day all the way to the different behaviors and the communication habits or styles you've already built. If it's you're playing it with someone you know, as well as with strangers. So we've had bosses play with their employees, and halfway through playing, one of them announced, "Wow, I'm really pushy," and then all of his employees nodded their heads, but everyone was blindfolded. We just got to see it as facilitators, which has been hilarious.
Oh man.
But like it was presented as a joke, but they nodded their heads and it was serious. But because it was light, because it was just a game, we use that. And then that's where the incredible facilitators like yourself come in. That's where it invites a conversation that is not as threatening, that can be more if you're looking at like more growth minded, less fixed. Now that we've adapted it to play online, we would ship the toys. So Amara, you'd get like half a toy, I'd have the other half. Or for folks that don't have the physical toys, the pattern, we actually have a digital toy library. So you'd be seeing a digital image of a pattern, but you would actually see it from different perspectives. So you get one perspective, your colleague would get a second perspective, your other colleague would get a third, and there's missing information. And so what we're finding with the online versions of it is all of the fun, tense parts of remote work just show up in like 5 minutes. And it's a safe place to unpack that.
You know, I've been there. I know exactly what you're talking about. But I think just, really going back to what you said about how how through play, you're able to really raise awareness. I think it's self-awareness actually, because through play, you're able to really activate people. And because when you're having fun, maybe your guard is down, you really get to show, your vulnerable side. And that's a learning point, when you get engaging, you're trying to explain, no, but do it this way, and the other person like, I don't understand what you're saying. It's like, how do you deal with that discomfort? How do you deal with that frustration? And that can be very, very helpful in how you actually translate that into the workplace. So of course, this show is talking about empathy, and we're talking about empathy as a critical element. And I think I should have that here as a critical element for inclusive workplaces, right? And the question I'd like to ask you then is, at what point do you have people reaching out to you and saying, Ilana, help us? What is the process normally?
So when I first started 21 Toys, my joke is that I accidentally became an entrepreneur. I'm a designer. So I originally invented the empathy toy. It was my thesis project in university. I studied industrial design, and it was originally designed for visually impaired students to play with their sighted classmates. And it ended up getting some accolades or winning some awards. And then, much like most industrial designers, at least at that time, they said, this is a great idea. You should find a company to sell it to. And I thought, okay, I guess that's what I should do. And then I'm super lucky. No one was interested in starting that company.
As usual.
Why? I wouldn't want to start an empathy company selling empathy toys to schools. But from day one, I think I had the benefit that everyone thought it was really fascinating and interesting, but I don't think anyone thought it was going to work as a business. And so I use that as a bit of a secret weapon, just because if there are no expectations, it's easier when you fail. And so I started off 21 Toys with, I had a very modest artist grant for about $1,200, and I built prototypes. Wow. So I had my one school project that I built in school, and then I made multiple versions of it and a website. And then I would either volunteer or sneak into education conferences, and I would leave the toys on the table. And then I'd walk away. So teachers would kind of swarm or ask, where did this come from? Who made this? And that's how I'd start a dialogue. Just because my first question was really, do schools need this? And then the next question as an entrepreneur is, well, are they going to buy it? Like, is there a value in it? And I was very lucky. While I was doing that work, I was invited to give a TEDx talk. So I gave a TEDx talk on how I invented the empathy toy. And thanks to that, a school board saw that on Twitter and reached out, and that's how they put in their first order. At the same time, right after I got off stage, the first person to talk to me was a facilitator. And they said, I would love to use this for corporate. And I said, corporate? What are you talking about? And then kind of kept it in the back of my mind. And then when we went into that school board and we delivered they pre-ordered 30 kits. We did a demo of the toy to a room of 30 educators, and it was not a demo. It was a professional development workshop. So we started with, this is how you use the toy with your students. Let's try it out. 15 minutes in, we were unpacking what empathy means for an educator in the work that they do. And so from day one, we saw that opportunity that the toy is age agnostic. The toy is gender agnostic. It's like language agnostic. The opportunity to put play into the hands of young students all the way up to corporate teams, it was pretty obvious from day one. But I was genuinely confused when an HR consultant, I think at one of the corporate workshops that I ran, I was like, okay, this facilitator will get it. So I ran a workshop with him.
Yeah.
I said, any questions at the end of the workshops? And 3 people raised their hand and said, how can I buy this toy? I want to use it. And I said, you're also facilitators? And they're like, we're HR professionals. One of them was like, oh, I run an HR department. And I was like, looking like, what is HR? Like, what are they talking about?
Yeah.
It's all been really organic. And those were years. So all of the workshops and the training programs and the guidebooks that come with our toys, all organically been developed through those early enthusiastic folks in education and in the corporate space.
Wow, that's amazing. I love the toys, and I just know that it's such a great way, and like you rightly said, with play, such a great way to really get people, asking those questions and really trying to understand the benefits of empathy. I mean, like we already know that we live in times right now where we need empathy. I mean, there's never been a better time to talk about empathy, and a lot of companies, a lot of schools are really going all in, to talk about empathy. And we have some. Okay, Eve has some. Okay, let's see here. Eve has something to say. Eve. Okay, so Eve says, I know some toy designers where I live and went to an amazing symposium in Berlin on inclusive toy design last year. Fab to hear your thoughts. Very, very interesting. And then she also says, can we see any of the toys? I think you just reached out.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can grab them in a minute. Have them,
sure.
Have them behind me. So they're, you can find some really beautiful photos or videos of them on YouTube, and we can send links to them because it's much better to understand than as seeing them than speaking towards them. But yeah, I would say the thing that's been so interesting about putting play into the hands of folks is that from day one, when I started the business, we definitely chose an exceptional challenge, which was to talk about the value of play and at the same time talking about the value of empathy. And now with a failure toy with like resilience. And when I started the company, so when you said the quote from Time Magazine, so Time Magazine put the empathy toy as like a key technology shaping the classrooms of the future. This was 2014. Wow. And I remember saying, empathy seems to have arrived as becoming more mainstream, that folks in the education space are really understanding the value of it about a year into when we had started. So we had the fact that it was in Time Magazine as an empathy toy, incredible, like for us as a company, but it was also a really interesting data point that a wooden toy with no digital elements was called a future technology.
Amazing.
It really was incredibly validating. And I think with the corporate world and the value of empathy, we started to see that really pick up, I would say around closer to like 2014, 2015. So we've got Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, wrote like an entire book about how we transformed Microsoft with empathy. We've got like Stuart Butterfield, who is the inventor of Slack and formerly I think co-founded Flickr.
Oh, okay.
The value of empathy. Like a lot of thought leaders came out, and this was before Brene Brown. So what was interesting is kind of like the trend lines. Like I feel like we were very lucky. We were
the right time
years ahead.
Yeah.
So when COVID hit, it was it was a hugely existential moment for us. Because as you know, everything we were doing up until that point was only in person. And there is a world where we might someday create a virtual version of gameplay, but I'm very biased. And also as an industrial designer, the value of 3D physical objects to represent the theoretical is incredibly valuable. To touch something, to feel it, to have weight to it. It gives it that value. It makes it really tangible. And so when COVID hit, we had an existential crisis where everything we were doing to that point was in person, which means everything stopped. All of the workshops we had booked that year stopped. All of the in-person training you took, that was our last in-person training.
I know. I was lucky.
And then I was thinking, well, what school is going to buy a physical toy? I don't even know if people are physically in schools. And we had a really intense moment of going, do we still make sense in this new world?
Right.
And the first, I think COVID officially was that Friday the 13th that happened. Everything went offline. And that Sunday, I got a message on WhatsApp from one of our biggest corporate clients that said, our team is really struggling. We now have to do remote work. People are very overwhelmed, really stressed out. We were really looking forward to that empathy workshop that we were going to fly out to. I think it was London or the US to run a workshop with like UX designers. Said, we actually need this now more than ever for our team. Can you do it online? And so that's what prompted us to figure out how to run our empathy toy workshops online. And by Wednesday, we had like a working prototype.
Wow.
And it didn't remove the toys, it complemented them. So instead of us showing up in person with a bag of toys like Santa Claus and we would play and then go back to Toronto, instead we would ship out the toys to folks' homes and then we would all meet online and play. And it didn't even feel like, well, this is unexperienced. It's not as good as in person. It really met the moment. And that's how we're finding so many of the teams we work with now.
Wow.
Everyone is struggling to figure out how to work remotely, how to communicate remotely.
Exactly.
And also how to invest in your team. Because the value of emotional intelligence since 2020, we are not fighting that battle as we did when we first started. Because in the early days, people would say, can we get an empathy workshop? And then they'd say, please don't call it that.
Why? Because it sounds like
they're in trouble. Because folks would say, why are we going to an empathy workshop? Are we in trouble? Is this it's been interesting to see the attitude change. Because for us, we're like, we don't have to call it the empathy toy. It's still going to be an empathy workshop. But we've had so many workshops, and I don't know if you've experienced this, where I've had my team back in the day when it was in person, they'd be in the elevator and one of the attendees, actually one of the bosses, was saying, oh, I'm going to this empathy workshop, and was talking about it. And our facilitators were there. And they said, I don't know why we're, something along the lines of like, why are we spending time on this? And I would say 9 out of 10 times, the person in the room who is wondering why it's happening, why we're investing in it, 45 minutes in, they're the one that stands up and declares, this is the most important thing in our company. They say, we need to start talking about empathy. And so giving folks the opportunity to play and being okay with them showing up where they're at, reaching their own conclusions, has been, for me, one of the most exciting parts of the workshops. And it's also easy for us because we're like, oh, great, someone who's not sure. That's great, because I'm excited for that person to tell me at the end of the workshop.
Yeah.
It's important. So that's a really fascinating lens of folks might value it or understand it, but there's still folks that are uncomfortable with calling it that. They want to call it something else.
Yeah, I have a similar experience, like, because of the word empathy, you think like, oh, what is this? Like, it just seems sometimes can be quite abstract. Yeah. And you're thinking, what do you mean? And I remember, because I also facilitate in around the world, and most recently in Africa. And I just remember running this training in, for example, in the Central African Republic, and people were kind of like, what is this? What are these toys? At first you're like trying to figure it out, and at the very end, I mean, when we did the debrief, it was just incredible how each of they had about 60 people in that training, and everyone was just, all the different teams that came up we're able to just really talk about empathy in a way that I'd never even imagined, because we're able to really connect it to, their own lived experience in the workplace, because we're talking about, okay, where do we need empathy, and what are some things that promote or take away from empathy. And it was just amazing to hear their stories, and for me, I just felt like, oh my gosh, and they'd never talked about it before. They were they'd never talked about, the word empathy was never in their dictionary. It was never something that was part of their day-to-day conversations, and this was something that I felt like, wow, we really need to work on this. We really need to talk about this, because that's what impacts the team building. It impacts inclusion. It impacts how people feel, whether the people feel like they belong or not. It all starts with the conversations, right? Emotional intelligence. So yeah, I don't know your experiences. I'm sure you must have a lot. Like, have you ever had like this moment you're like, wow, they get it?
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, I think I must have run, I'm sure it was about 1,000 workshops. I don't run whenever we're designing something new, I'm involved, but I don't run them as much as our director of training and facilitation, Ryan, is phenomenal. But yeah, in the early days, in the first few years, there were so many moments of just insights. I think for me, there was one. Okay, I did actually. Yeah, I ran a workshop with about 200. No, I'll tell you. Okay, I'll tell two stories. So the first one is about a school. So there was a teacher that had been teaching with the empathy toy, and they decided to flip the script and they decided to take one of the students that was really quite loud and would interrupt and get very excited. She made him the guide. So what that means is that he was given a built pattern, blindfolded, and then he would need to give directions to 3 other students that were also blindfolded with loose pieces. And he was giving his instructions, and they kept interrupting, and no one was listening. And then he got really frustrated, and he was like, if you don't stop talking, you're not going to get the right instructions, or we're not going to get this done. And then there was like a quietness in the room, and he goes, wow, being a teacher is really hard. And his teacher told us this story. She was so happy about it, but she was able to go back to that throughout the years and in the lesson, and relate back to just that one experience. And each game lasts 5-15 minutes. It's the debrief that happens immediately after, and then ongoing discussions. And it shouldn't be a one-off. It's definitely a toy that's used over and over. But the one other story I'll share is on the corporate end. So I was running a workshop with, I think, about 200 folks. And what we do in those workshops is it was 10 tables with 20 people at it.
Okay.
And this is the opposite of that gameplay. There's so many different gameplays.
Yeah.
This one there is one builder, so one person with loose pieces, and then there's a built pattern in the middle of the table. So it's a circular table. The 19 other folks are seeing it from a different perspective, and they're guiding this one builder to build it. And so the timing started, and the dynamic when it's that many people, especially when it's in person, you can tell if you're doing well or not. So as some teams were finishing up and getting there, like you could see they're right in front of me, the table in front of me had not put a single piece together. And I started hearing everyone else cheering and laughing, and you could see how stressed out they were.
Yeah.
So I had to actually call it, and they never finished building the pattern. And I said, okay, who, I started to ask for insights. And the one builder at that table was like raising his hand, like very enthusiastically. And I went, okay, well, how did that go? And he said, we won. And I went, well, there are no winners. Also, like, you didn't win. You clearly did not win. And he said, no, we won because, and this was a team in banking that dealt mostly a lot with customer service. He said, I was trying to build this, and I was getting so frustrated. My team was not giving me the instructions I needed. And I was given all these different responses, and no one asked me what I needed. And I started hearing other people who are doing well. And he had this insight. He said, oh, this is what our customers feel. This is how they feel when they're on the phone with us, when they're trying to problem solve, and they're just getting all of this information, but no one's actually checking in with them to see where they're. So he goes, because of that, we won. And I was like, there are no winners, but also, yeah, okay.
I like that. I like what that person said. The fact that they're throwing all these answers, but no one is actually listening. And right, like, and I think that's actually what happens during the games. That people want to just give you advice and like, do it this way, but no one is taking the time to listen, to figure out where you're coming from and if you're actually understanding it. And I think it ties into working in the workplace, because you're constantly working with projects, working with people, right? And it's so easy to miss the point. It's so easy to misunderstand what your colleague is trying to tell you, or maybe what your line manager is communicating.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, we always like to say it's understanding is more important than knowing. And so sometimes, depending, like if the house is on fire, sure, sometimes you just have to just tell me the information. But when you're collaborating, you're building a team, you're building trust, always start with understanding before you tell the person all the things that you know, because they may not be ready to receive it because you haven't built that trust. You haven't built that understanding yet. So that's one of the takeaways, I would say, from a lot of the insights you would get from playing.
I really like that. I'm going to write that down. Understanding is better than knowing. Is that what you said?
Understanding is more important.
More important.
So it's kind of, it translates to, if you're going to give someone information or the answer,
like that,
make sure that you're on the same page first. Make sure that you've spent, it can even be one sentence. It doesn't have to be a full conversation, but just understand that start from understanding.
Right. If you're on the same page, because that's the thing, like, are you on the same page? Right. Because if you're not, if you're having different ideas, then you've lost it already. You're already, on the losing
same
end
page. And trust building, I think, especially when we're in a remote world, that seems to be one of the most important elements, is that you need to trust that the other person you're talking to is working towards the same goals as you. And you can understand where they're coming from. And so often in remote, like I would joke, like, with your friends, if someone texts you and you don't text them back, and then they're like, are they mad at me?
Yeah.
Exclamation mark. What did they mean? Apply that to the business world. There's so many different ways that we can read into tone, inflection, what that person is feeling or thinking. And so if you don't build that in, giving time for folks to build that trust, and doing that through play is the most powerful way to build trust. It's going to show up in different ways. It's going to show up in tensions, when things are going well a little bit, but the second things are stressful or difficult.
Yeah.
That's why you invest in team building. That's why you invest in this work. It's not for the good days. It's for the bad days.
For the bad days. Absolutely. And I guess the question I would ask would be, what are some other tips that if you were to give tips to businesses, because right now we are going through a really rough time. I mean, companies are really trying to build this inclusion, because how do you do this when you have people dialing in from all around the world? Everyone is working from home now, and sometimes people feel disconnected. It's so easy to, be online, but then have the phone and the kids running around. You know what I mean? So, like, what are some tips? What tips would you give to people to kind of really enhance this spirit of, inclusion and really build this inclusive workplace?
I think it happens at multiple levels, and you should be doing multiple things at the same time if this is something that is important for your company. I would say the first one is to do kind of a pulse check. Where is everyone at? Does anything foundationally or systematically actually need to change within the structure of the business, both with who's in place and who we're bringing in? Or, like, I think getting from a leadership perspective,
right,
that you need, experts such as yourself, or folks that are coming in, or facilitators, or folks that can help you get a pulse check on the existing business. Because I can tell you, with COVID, it wasn't just navigating the team dynamics for us. It was our business model. It was there's
everything. Yeah.
It's a lot of stress and a lot of tension. And I think sometimes you don't always have to fix everything. I think just acknowledging, hey, no one expected a global pandemic. So yeah, it's going to be a little stressful for the next few months.
Right.
Here's how we are going to mitigate against that. We're going to, like, right when COVID first hit, I was having check-ins with everyone on the team. I was making sure that I had like 1 hour with each person on the team each week to make sure that I just understood what was going on with them, whatever they're comfortable sharing. So I could understand if someone is just having a stressful day, it may or may not have to do with work.
Mm-hmm.
It could be other things that they're bringing in. And I think finding the balance of how you're able to do that is, as a company, that builds that trust. And then on the other end, checking in and getting folks, giving them time to connect and to play. I think one of the challenges right now with remote work is that when we were all in person in an office or, in a building, you have a lot of serendipity. You pass people on your way in.
Right.
You have more organic interactions. So it's not always we have an agenda, we have a timeline, we have to get through it. And if you don't make space for play and for serendipity and for taking the pressure off to build that culture and to build that trust, it's going to make it really difficult if you're going to then do something quite drastic. If you're going to say, look, as a company, we want to build more inclusion, we want to do these larger things, everyone on board with that requires trust and a certain level of vulnerability and transparency.
Absolutely.
So for us, I am not an expert in inclusion or diversity and equity, but I am an expert in the toy and how things like play and making space for trust building and for really valuable discussions, how that fits into a much larger initiative to move your company forward. Because I think most people know now, the stats, there are folks who altruistically want this to happen, but there's also just really good business cases for not having homogenous teams and having one perspective on your team is just bad business. It's just not
bad for innovation.
They always say with design, don't design in a vacuum. You need to go out into the world. You need to talk to people who don't have the same perspectives, and that's all empathic research.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is amazing, and I just think that it's so important. And what better way through play? Through play, you're really able to activate people. And I think not only that, you just break those barriers. One thing I've noticed that, so for example, I ran this same workshop in Norway. And the one thing I noticed was just the barrier just drops and people just feel more open because they're laughing. And then we can actually have those very, difficult questions or difficult conversations, if you will. And I'm just wondering right now if there are any questions, because we're almost running out of time. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask. Ilana is right here. Ask her the questions about the empathy toy, about play. And we really need play. Even if we're adults, we still need to play. And I think that, a lot of times people have, go to, team building and they wait until things are really in a bad way before they engage in any kind of a team building activities. And I think that it's something that we need to, incorporate throughout, the year at some, juncture, we shouldn't wait till, the team is bleeding, before we reach out to really connect and reconnect and really collaborate and create that environment that allows us to be human, right? Because when we are playing, we're at our most human, self. Maybe I don't know if that's the right word, but you know what I mean. You're most vulnerable, your most natural state.
There's a study out of NASA that I talk about a lot about creative genius, and we may have shared it with you, but we're all born creative geniuses, and it's kind of the year between the age 4 and 25, you lose 98% of it. So this study came out of NASA that looked at, and the idea is that we stop valuing play and we value marks. And deconstructing this idea that play is not work and work is about getting that really good mark. And it's a very fixed way of thinking. And I think what's exciting right now is that to create abundance and to be optimistic, we need to spark more of our imagination and our creativity. And those are not all separate. They're not siloed. They're all connected. And so if we don't make room for play, we're not making room for creativity. We're not making room for emotional safety.
Right.
And I think in any space, especially when it's serious and heavy, is the inclusion space. I think the building safety and trust, I think play has a really important role in us imagining just a better future because if we're only sticking to what we know, it's very easy to become overwhelmed, stressed, and we kind of stop imagining. Like there should be a lot of hope and optimism in this space, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, before we round up, I really want to ask you, what are some new projects you're working on, and where can people find you? I mean, I have the website on there, but maybe there's some other projects you're working on. You know, maybe just talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, so I've got so Ev, I can share afterwards. We have a video on how we've pivoted to online. It's a story actually that UPS told about us just a few months ago. But yeah, what we're working on right now is the failure toy. So I finished designing the failure toy in 2018, and we launched it for mass production on Kickstarter November or October 2019. So like right before everything shut down. So we finished production exactly a year ago. And this month is when we're launching online failure toy workshops. So we're able to run workshops on empathy, but also on failure, resilience, grit, prototyping. So it's really, really exciting. So that's what our spring and winter is going to look like. Awesome. And then in the fall, we'll be looking at picking back up the training that you took. We're building that online. And so
awesome.
We'll reaching out to all the facilitators in your network and yourself as well.
Yes, please. It's amazing. If anyone out there, you all like really, this is, I tell you, I'm always talking about empathy toy because it just really literally transformed my life. And I mean that like literally, just because of the impact it's having, you know, and my ability to really connect with people as well. So please, you know, go to 21toys.com and reach out. They have an incredible website. And we do have some questions, which is great. So we have some time to answer some questions. So this is Eve. Let's see here. Eve says, could you walk through how people have been using those toys in a remote working environment? That's a good question.
Yeah. So the way that we use the toys in the remote environment is so we'll ship a part of the toy, so your own kit. That's actually what's behind me. So we have a shipment going out soon. That's my homework. So we ship those out to folks' homes, and then one of our facilitators will guide something, usually about like a 90-minute workshop. So it'll be a combination of gameplay, where we have lots of different variations. So the first one would be if it's a large group, we'd put you into breakout rooms, or you'd work all in one room. But everyone turns off their cameras. So that's our version of the blindfold. And then the folks with the physical toys wait for instructions from the guides. And the guides are sent a link. We have a digital toy library. So you type in, we send you a special URL, and it reveals a photograph, but it's of one perspective of the same pattern. And so the guides need to get on the same page to figure out what perspectives they have. And then they need to let the builder know how to build it. And that's always the first game that we play, and then different variations to build off of that. We've had versions where you'll turn your video off and your microphone off. And so you can only give instructions through the chat window, which you can imagine how that goes. I'm surprised that a lot of folks actually still get it. But right away, we're able to really mimic real world.
Confusion.
And options. Yeah. And so we'll focus on what didn't work, but we always start the debrief with what worked. And so the positives of what was good. So people will say like, it was really hard, but my team really encouraged me to keep going, or it was really great when you started using metaphors, or there's a lot of things that we'll focus on what works. Then we can work on like what was challenging. And then always we bring it back to how can I apply that to my work?
Right. It's awesome. I mean, I've attended these, the online version, and yeah, it was really interesting because I mean, I had the real life experience and then the online, and both were quite different, but still very interesting, and still have the element of, you know, wow, like just, you know, really eye opening, you know, so really powerful. And yeah, definitely try it. You have online workshops. I mean, like you run these online workshops, right? Not workshops, but like a kind of a gameplay kind of, right? Or
we do, yeah. So with our empathy toy, here can I throw it into the chat window?
Yeah.
Or I
Yeah.
can,
Yeah, do that. You can.
So I can send a link to describe what happens in an empathy toy. And then if you reach out to us, we're going to be running, we're restarting our global play session. So we'll be running the failure toy. So I can share the Eventbrite link. It should be up next week. So we'll be running kind of free sessions for folks to try out with the new failure toy.
Great.
It's what we did with the empathy toy when we were first launching it this last year. So here, I've sent it to you in the private room, Mara. So I can copy that. Yeah. So that explains the online empathy toy experience. But yeah, it's all remote, and so I think the most exciting thing for us is you mentioned we're in over 50 countries, but we haven't actually had a chance to talk to all the folks in all over the world because of until COVID, until we were all online. So the global play sessions are a really great spot.
Yeah. I mean, I really, really enjoyed them. I'm trying to find it, but either way, okay, here, I think it's this one here. Just need to, there we go. I'll save it and it should come up, right? That's it, right? Is that correct? Well, they may not see it. But what I'll do is I'll just put it on my profile. Yeah, and people can just easily connect with that. And then Anas had one more question before I run off. I know we're out of time, but maybe do we have time for one more question?
Oh yeah.
Okay, great. I hope that answered your question, Eve. Thank you so much for that question, Eve. So Anas Janud, he says, sometimes while we're trying to implement empathy at the workplace, some leaders do passive empathy. How do we prevent such practices? That's a good question, Anas. Yeah.
I think, so I'm going to make some assumptions with what you mean by passive empathy, but my thinking is they're not really investing in it. So they're maybe saying, yeah, this is important, but they're not really actively doing anything about it or doing very little. I think it's challenging. I think you do either, we've seen the best applications have been for sure when you have leadership at the top that understands the value of it. But we've also seen the value of very motivated employees and definitely folks in the learning and development space within a team that advocate for it. So while leadership might not necessarily be on board, of course, if they're really not on board with it, that's going to be a much harder thing to push. But there's a lot of opportunities for folks within an organization to advocate for that. And ideally, I know with us, when we've had someone from leadership who maybe was lukewarm and they're trying to get buy-in, inviting them to the sessions and seeing it firsthand, getting them something in that experience, we've seen that work really, really well to get folks on board to really understand the value of it. It can be just really challenging, especially with things like empathy and also with our failure toy. There's just so much stigma around the words.
Right.
You first need to unlearn or remove what they think it is, and then rebuild it. So it can be quite challenging. But I know from our view, so much of the thought leadership, if you Harvard Business Review or any articles right now, everyone is talking about the importance of empathy and understanding its value. Where usually we meet leaders is they just don't understand what to do about that.
Right.
How can we build that? How can we work through that? So we always recommend, either for us, we have a team of expert facilitators we bring in. So it's always good to bring in an external facilitator if they don't have that internal facilitator capacity.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people have these misconceptions, and that's why you just have to give them a little bite-sized experience to really captivate their imagination and recognize the importance of it. Because empathy is the foundation of all conversation, right? The ability to understand the other person. Imagine if you're working with people, or even at home, and you're unable to see the other person's point of view. I mean, we already know what the worst case scenario could be. I mean, we're seeing that live, right? In the real world. So it's definitely worth investing in. And really, when we're talking about, especially when I talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really thinking about the idea of belonging starts with communication. Like, how are you communicating to your people? How are you communicating to your staff, your team members, right? It all boils down to having that understanding. How are you engaging? How are you delaying judgment? How are you you know having that patience, taking a moment to understand what the other person is feeling, thinking, right? To engender understanding. So it's such an important element, and your work is really phenomenal, Ilana. Thank you so much.
So much. I feel the same about you. I mean, the whole reason that I started 21 Toys is because I want to put these tools into professionals like yourselves and to see how far you can go with it. So the fact that not only are you using it, but you're finding your own creativity within it and you're finding your own voice within it. That's why I started. That's why I started the business. That's why I keep designing toys.
and your toys are amazing, and the failure toy, I have to say, is incredible. And maybe we should do a separate show on failure, because that's a topic on its own.
Yeah.
And again, huge insights there. I played the game, and wow, there was just like amazing experience, and I can't wait to have another show. So you have to come back, Ilana. You have to come back. I want to thank you so much for joining me today on the show. It's been very interesting, and I'm sure eye-opening for a lot of people. You saw Eve and Anas just asking these really important questions, and you can imagine when people watch it, maybe on a replay, there'll be more questions, because even though empathy, we know, is extremely important, the idea of using play to really activate those centers is not so common, and people are not that keyed in. So this is definitely a huge opportunity. And so I want to thank you so much for sharing with us today, and to thank everyone that showed up and engaged with us. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ilana.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone. And that's it. So until next time, be well. And yeah, keep having fun, keep engaging. If you can, join the empathy toy play session and really try to understand the impact of play, as it helps you to really connect and really build that connection, especially if you're wanting to build an inclusive workplace. Think about play. Think about the 21 Toys, and see how they can potentially support you and help you in your journey. So yeah, with that, I'll say a big goodbye. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.